Hello, dear listener, and welcome to the Symposium podcast. This is my first ever interview, and it's with Tobias Taylor, and he's the reason why I decided to start the podcast. One day, I met Tobias through my work. I was filming a short interview with him, but when I started asking questions, I was so intrigued that I felt compelled to plan a full-on interview and get to know him better. Tobias is a runner amongst many other things, and he's not just a runner, he's a runner that goes for really intense running challenges. And one of these challenges that he completed successfully is the Everesting. The Everesting is an activity in which a cyclist or a runner ascends and descends a given hill multiple times in order to reach the height of 8,848 meters or 29,000 feet, the elevation of Mount Everest. I sit with Tobias and ask him about his running passion, how it started, and how it led him to achieve such an amazing feat as the Everesting Challenge. Also, to give some context, the interview is happening just the day before, at the eve of his second challenge, the Double Everesting. So enough from me. Let's hear from Tobias. I'll see you on the other side, and I wish you a happy listening. My favorite podcast. It's a good question. It's very obvious because I already mentioned it when we were talking on the phone. It's the Joe Rogan Experience. Because I just like the format of him just like having a genuine conversation. He's like most of the time, especially like more towards the start of the podcast, he's just like inviting people because he's like genuinely interested and curious in whatever the person is doing.
Yeah.
And you could be like a comedian, a scientist, a weirdo.
Yeah.
You would still be like,
Thank you
hey.
for putting me in that category.
Yeah. No. I didn't put you in that category.
No,
No, I was actually thinking of the people that he would interview. Something that I really like about him, that I think it's underappreciated, is that like he's willing to interview someone or listen to someone even if they have like weird or like even questionable ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important because even if someone has like really, really like dangerous or like questionable things that he's talking about, like, you still should listen to him. First of all, because like you understand how he thinks.
Yeah.
Second of all, because like you can actually have a conversation with him and actually you can maybe not convince him, but like give him a different point of view.
Yeah.
Because like many times, like people that tend to have like very extremist thoughts and very extremist thoughts, that they tend to talk just with other people that are like, that think the same. So like they just create this bubble and like they don't get a different point of view. For example, like it's really funny that sometimes he probably had like a couple flat earth people.
I honestly, it's such a great exercise, purposefully listening to a conversation where you're almost adamant that you disagree with the person, because if you disagree to the person to a certain extent, you probably like decided you dislike the person, right? You really don't gel with them. And then you have this almost automatic thought that you disagree with them even on stuff you shouldn't disagree with them, because they probably have the odd idea that's actually pretty sound. And so it's a really good exercise trying to find some common ground, listening to like very extreme points of view to your own. I find Lex Friedman's really good at that. Both of them are, trying to listen to either some like ultra right conversation or flat earther or some conspiracy theorist or
Yeah, I do like Lex Friedman as well. I like his approach. Whoever person is there, he's asking like genuine questions. So I think that's something really good about podcasts, is that like anyone can do it, like,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I decided to do it as well, because like usually I enjoy having conversation with people.
Yeah.
So like I already do it in my everyday life. I really, really find it interesting to hear about other people, what they're doing, like what is their drive in their life and stuff like that. So again, like talking with you last time, I was like, it
was a fun conversation.
Yeah. And it just like, it would be interesting to hear, because like for me, it's such a foreign idea concept to be like, I would be taking such a big challenge because like I'm not a big fan of running. I do it because I know the value of it. It's so good. Many times, like before going for a run, I'll be like, no, I don't want to do it, blah, blah, blah. Then I do it. And later I feel like so good, you know?
I wish I always felt good after my runs.
How do you feel after your runs usually? I would say like, first of all, let's just give like some context because we know what's
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so the context is tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I am attempting a double Everest in winter. So the context of this is that Everesting emerged in the cycling world, and the bare bones of it is that you pick a hill and you go up and down that hill, either on a bike, on foot, until you've acquired the sea to summit elevation of Everest. Mm-hmm. So that got picked up in the cycling world, the running world took it, and it's really simple. You can do it wherever you find a hill, which makes it a challenge. There's no destination. It's all inside your head, which also makes it a challenge. And they're all different because everyone picks a different length hill. So some people prefer a shorter, sharper hill that you're moving slower on, and other people prefer a longer, slower hill, but it's less sharp. So that emerged, and then naturally, as these things do, people started trying to push a bit further. And so in the running world, there's been 14 people who have done a double Everest and 3 who have done a triple Everest, actually.
Wow.
1 who's done a quadruple Everest. Actually, the only person in the UK to have done a double Everest is the person who's done a quadruple Everest. They are called Tom Hollins. They're based a bit further up north. Honestly, totally in awe. Fantastic achievement. But basically, usually in the community of the FKT, or fastest known time community, there are regular FKTs, and then there are winter ones. The winter ones always have to be in the middle 3 months of winter, which come with its own set of challenges. Often it's bad weather, but a big thing is also that you spend a lot of time in the dark.
Oh, yes.
So although the Everesting kind of Worldwide Hall of Fame doesn't really note a difference between winter and summer, no one's actually done a winter double Everest. So I thought that's a fun challenge. Adds its own kind of drive, the fact that, trying to do something that no one's done. And the big challenge there, I think, is going to be the darkness. 16 hours of darkness a day is going to take at least 2 days, maybe 2.5. Oh, and a note on the Everesting is that you're not allowed to sleep doing an Everesting.
Because it was too easy.
Because it can take you as long as possible, it still counts, but you can't sleep. The caveat to that is that on every subsequent Everest, you're allowed 2 hours of sleep. So once you've completed the first Everest, you almost unlock yourself 2 hours of sleep if you want to take it before you complete the second Everest. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So the height of the Mount Everest is like 8,000.
Yeah, 8,848 meters. So obviously double that, 17,696 if my maths is correct.
Yeah. What hill did you choose? It's so funny because like there is the saying like, what hill did you decide to die on? Like,
This is the hill. Basically, how this came about was if we roll it back, I had seen, I think to explain this, I'm just going to quickly dive into how I got into this. So I saw a video titled What It's Like to Run 135 Miles. And the thumbnail had someone's feet that were not in good shape. And it's a very short video, and it just absolutely enthralled me. I don't think I'd really registered people ran more than a marathon. And this was probably 10 years ago. Over that, I tried to get into running, didn't really know anyone in a running community, dabbled, struggled with it, in and out. In 2018, I signed up for a 50K, didn't really train for it, tried to do it. I think I managed roughly a marathon before dropping out. or actually I dropped out before then, but to get to the place where I could get picked up or stopped, it ended up being a marathon. Mm-hmm. And then it was a few years, and then it wasn't till, I think it was the summer of 2021, where I was living in Devon, South Dartmoor, had some great kind of outdoor space, and I linked up with this running community on the moors. And it absolutely normalized these big efforts. There would be a social Wednesday night run. And I remember my friend Jen showing up, who'd run a 50-miler on the weekend, a race, and just seemed absolutely normal. And for me, it was a huge shift in my mind. And so it just became this kind of ramp up of you have this goal of like, oh, I wonder if I could do this. And it's always something that's, it's far, but it's maybe just within reach. There's a chance, there's an inkling. So it's never stuff that's wildly inaccessible, or at least maybe I'm just overly optimistic, but got the 50K done and then signed up for a mountain 100K. So it was in Snowdonia. And that one I was really questioning whether I was going to die. I really
During or before?
Before going into that, I thought, wow, Tobias, you're really out of your depth here. I wrote letters to friends and family on my iCloud in case, and no one's seen those. So, but basically, outside where I was living in Devon, there's a hill. It goes from almost right outside the house up, and it's 156 meters. It feels like a hill if you ever even walk it. I think when I moved there, I was not able to walk up without stopping. And I just had this thought, I was like, if I could just spend a lot of time on this hill and just get really good at hills. And that's kind of how it started. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I could do a vertical kilometer on this hill. I wonder if then I discovered this Everesting concept, kind of caught my attention, and managed to get that done earlier this year on that same hill. Mm-hmm. And there's bigger goals.
So you did one Everest?
Yes.
On the hill? Oh, okay.
So we did the one Everest, and usually with some of these big projects, there's a feeling of it's this big thing and a question over it because it's further than you've ever been, or there's some big kind of thing like that. For the single Everest, I think I underestimated it. In my head, I was already planning the double Everest. And so I was like, oh, we just need to get the single Everest done. And obviously it was very hard. Mentally tougher than I expected.
Okay. But probably like thinking about already thinking about the second Everest maybe helped you a bit, because you're like, this challenge is not bigger than me. The double Everest thing is like the big challenge.
Yeah, I think there's two sides, and there's a strength to minimizing it, in the sense that, oh, I'm just going out, for a little run on a hill, and you kind of like play all these tricks on your mind, you're not making it into a big deal. But then there's also, I definitely find the benefit of feeling like this is the thing. I mean, this sounds maybe not ideal, but it's almost like a willingness to die doing the thing. With it, I feel like you have to get there mentally to be able to go through
that's very interesting,
the hardship of it, because it's almost like I'm going to either die or finish this.
Wow.
Even though the reality is you're not going to die, because there's so many failure points that would stop you before then.
That's very, very interesting, because a lot in life is just like being scared about death. You have like your survival part of your mind that's just like trying to keep you safe and surviving. That's where always like puts the limit, like, oh, be careful not to die. If you get into that mindset where there's like something that's more important than survival, so like, even if I'm dying, like, this is what I want to do, you know, this is bigger than just surviving. I want to go over. So like, maybe that helps you subdue your mind and just be like, we're doing this no matter what.
Yeah, I think
because like your mind is always like, oh no, like, stop, this is too much. No, you know?
yeah, what about, I think your mind can so easily, get you into playing tricks on you to get you to quit. What if you don't want to hurt yourself, you don't want to injure yourself because of this, because of that, you don't want to. And I think that going in with that mindset is it's so helpful. And I think it also means you have to be careful, because you can't go in with that mindset into everything, because you're clearly not willing to die for a lot of things. But it's almost like if you have laid out a journey of goals that they get increasingly harder, and the reality is maybe you think there's no way you get to the final goal, but that's okay. And at every stage you think, it's unlikely that I manage this. And then you surprise yourself and you do, and you're like, oh, suddenly there's a bigger new goal in sight. But I think you have to be quite clear that you believe that you're doing something that is kind of true to yourself. You're living your own true life, in the sense that therefore you're much more like, I would be willing to die doing this thing, or I would be willing to permanently injure myself from this thing, because coming out of this thing permanently injured is still a better solution than being so fearful that I wasn't willing to. Right. Okay. It's almost like, oh, it would be lovely to live this long life with full body capacity. But if you get a goal stuck in your head that you then ignore because you think it's too dangerous, rather than say, this feels like the thing that I need to do as me. Yeah, it's almost like, because you've decided that and you've just justified that is on your own personal path, going around that or ignoring that or not going further on that path is worse than coming out of it permanently disfigured or psychologically scarred or whatever it might be.
That's interesting, because we all have that thing that we would like to do. You can call it like a dream or like a challenge. Yeah. But at the same time, you have two options. It's either like you go for it, even if it's bigger than you, the dream or the challenge, and you could be like psychologically or physically injured, or you can decide to not think about it, like ignore it or just give up or just be like, that's too much. But yeah, it's definitely worth it to try. And again, like you said, if you actually manage to do it, like you just end up surprised and you feel like you're a bigger person.
Yeah, I think, it's so easy to ignore. And I spent a lot of my life certainly ignoring.
How old are you?
29.
29, okay.
Ignoring, goals. And I think the world or your life often has these kind of, I refer to them as honeypots, but there's always some attractive reason that not to do the thing, because there's this level of risk or uncertainty. You have a good job and you actually want to be doing something completely different, but the job you have is really attractive and it's safe and you're being paid well or whatever the thing is. And that's the thing. And I think everyone has this in different areas of their life, or all their life or some of their life or none of their life. But it's a constant battle, because I don't think anyone gets to the point where there aren't big goals they wish they were going for.
Yeah.
Because your mindset evolves, right? So if I think back to me at age 16, I think a bunch in different categories, a bunch of the things I've done are much more significant than my dreams were back then, which is a great place to be in. But my dreams right now are so far in you adapt and you change and you change and you change. And so you end up with these big, big goals in the future. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't know it's so unlikely that I achieve the goals I have in my mind right now. But if I did, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's good to not be stagnant and always like have bigger goals. But at the same time, like something that I also find hard is that I set like really big goals, like for me in the future, and some of them like are so big that it just like kind of gets overwhelming.
Yeah.
So like you, for example, how do you cope with that?
Yeah, I think I sometimes I think sometimes when your goals are so big, it can be uncomfortable to share them because it's so easy for people to think they're ridiculous because they're so big. But and there can often be no clear route to get to them, right? So you have to develop stages on the way to, you have to have that, I think, both that vision in the future, but the focus has to be on something that's within reach. And then realizing that if you get through that thing that's within reach, then maybe there's something bigger down the road. Because if your goal is significant in some way, you're probably very far from it. And there's probably, you have to be humble enough to set targets that aren't that impressive, I think, early on.
Yeah, you're touching a lot of good points. I start small. Have like a big goal that's bigger than you, like you said. Have like many small steps that take you there. And I guess that you have to focus, like have the big goal in the future and focus on the day. This is what I have to do today. This is what I have to do tomorrow. Sometimes like your mind will just over focus on that big thing and might get overwhelming. And
yeah, I think the big vision helps when you're doing stuff you don't want to do, because it's almost like you can get excited about whatever the shit thing you're doing at the moment, that it's taking you a step further towards whatever your big vision is, even if it's not that exciting, because there's always, parts of the journey that it's either that they're really painful that you've got to go through, and having that vision of this is a step, this brings me happiness because it's, you're finding happiness in the suffering because it brings you closer to the big thing in the future. Pardon me. Or it can be that it helps you get through the more monotonous things that are just chores in the day-to-day, like if you're doing basic, if it's a physical thing and you're doing basic training for something, it's not that interesting, right? Or if it's more of a, from my perspective, if it's more of a career-based thing and that there's like the things you want to focus on are probably not the things you need to focus on.
What do you mean by that?
So let's say you have this big goal, and this could either be you want to launch you want to be successful, like one of the best videographers in the world. You probably want to be shooting incredible video, editing incredible video. There's probably a load of parts where to get to that stage, you've got to do all these chores that are like seeking out clients, dealing with a load of stuff that's not that interesting, maybe a bit of work on the training side and learning. And it's the same on the physical side, that you want to be doing these big challenges, or you want to be focused on this or that, but actually the steps to get to where you want to get to in the future are showing up every single day to do a really boring run in the rain, or to go, lift some weights because you need to build on the strength training, or to spend half an hour a day stretching because you need to make sure you're not getting injured and you've got the flexibility and that kind of thing. And that's not that exciting when you compare it to what you're like, oh, but I'm so excited, I have the drive to get me to this big goal in the future. But actually acknowledging to get there, there's a load of stuff you just have to set as this stuff has to get done. And I'm willing to do the stuff that other people perhaps are not willing to do, that's just the basic, to get me to a place where I'm even at a springboard level where it's within sight, Because I think that's the thing. It takes you quite a lot of effort and time to get to a point where, the dreams that got me into running, when I started running, the big dream was, it got stuck in my head to run 100 miles. And at the time that was so, I didn't know, it was so far in the future.
When you say stuck in your head, it means like, what do you mean? During when you were running, or like before?
I mean that the idea, it almost settled, this is a bit of how my brain works, that the idea settled in my head that, oh, you definitely have the capacity, if you put the work in, to run 100 miles. So therefore, you should run 100 miles. Or it stuck in my head in the sense that suddenly I'm the person who has turned away from putting the work in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my mind then being really harsh on me, as in, you haven't done this thing that, you know, and for me, that's really hard to live with. And I think that's how a lot of these motivations start, that it's not a feeling of, oh, I'll feel incredible once I've achieved that thing. It's, unless I'm working towards that thing to a point to get it done, my mind isn't very kind to me about it.
Mm.
And so almost it's irrelevant whether I actually succeed or fail, because as long as my mind thinks that we're putting in our best effort to get there, it's exactly the same, right? And so when some of these projects or goals get finished, it's not a feeling of joy or accomplishment. It's a, oh, that's fantastic. That's now out of my head. It's a freedom. It's a freedom from the oppression of the goal. It's like, to be honest, it went.
That's very intricate. But you also talked about a community that you got in touch with that helped you to level up.
Yeah, I think that's you know, there's such an obvious anecdote from the running community is Roger Bannister's 4-minute mile. You know, before he ran that, people thought it was impossible. I think in the ensuing years, hundreds and hundreds of people ran a sub 4-minute mile. It's this sudden mindset change that something's possible has quite a big effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so just normalizing, oh, you know, before it had been, oh my God, people run a 50-kilometer race and they're running for 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, depends how fast you go, right? This is, you know, this is in the trail community, so in the mountains or coast or whatever. And then suddenly you have a shift of, it's just a 50K, it's just 7 hours of running. And the further you go down this road, you know, suddenly you do something that's 10 hours of running, and then you do something that's 24 hours of running, and then you're running through the night, and then you're doing something that's, you know, the biggest problem is battling sleep, and you're running for longer than a day, and suddenly you look back and you're like, 7 hours is it's the stress and the kind of thought process of that is, it's just, we could just walk out the door and do it. The mindset's there that it's just, and so I think that's so fascinating. At what point, when you start to consider that at one point you thought this thing was impossible, and now you think where your mindset sits of what's impossible and what's normal shifts so far forward that it's so interesting. You know, the longest race I've done at the moment took me just under 40 hours, but that was the shorter half of a race. The full race, a lot of years, the winning time has been 100 hours. And so obviously people are sleeping, you know, the race goes on continuously. So the people who are winning that are probably sleeping 2 hours, 4 hours during the entire race. But if you theoretically, you get to a point where you're running a 100-hour race, suddenly you think about a 40-hour race. You know, it's just a 40-hour race. And it's so interesting to question where that mindset goes, you know?
Maybe I get what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that many times your limits are set by what you think is possible, but that's actually not your limit. The limit is further down. And if you push the idea of what's possible, you actually get to find out where you can get, you know?
And your question about community, I think it's not just about your own mental limits. It's about seeing the community around you has a big influence on what you do. And so I think that community helped me so much to normalize to normalize the longer distance stuff. And that community has some, I'm lucky enough to have some incredible friends who have done some incredible things, some incredible projects, some incredible races. Most of them are much faster than me. And it's also, the other side of that community is that when you try to attempt an interesting project, they're so supportive, people coming out to run with you at 2 a.m, 5 a.m.
That's a big boost. You're just
like, in bad weather, in the dark, they could be having a lovely Christmas time with their family, and instead they're out in the freezing rain in the dark with you when you're probably not even conscious. You're probably hallucinating that they're there, and they're probably spoon feeding you some soup or something. So yeah, it's honestly incredible. I am surrounded by some incredible people.
So talking about hallucinating, I never run more than an hour. So
yeah.
Talking to you right now, for me, my average running experience. Somewhere.
I remember thinking back to when I first tried to get into running, I was running 3-4 miles and coming home and feeling nauseous, and that would be me for the rest of the day. People said, it hurts when you're running, but once you've done it, you get that good sense of achievement. And I'd be spending the entire rest of the day thinking, I wish I'd never done this. Honestly, it's baffling to think back how I could have felt so awful after such a short run. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Me as well. When I started running, I was kind of in bad shape. I was running like 10 minutes, but it's really exhilarating to see, I actually can improve if I keep doing it. And now I can run an hour. I think you get different states, or at least when I'm running, when you're starting, you just have the resistance phase where you just, I don't want to do this. This is horrible. It's cold, but whatever, I'm tired. But then if you keep going, you get into a state of normalizing it. You're just like, oh, this is okay. And then towards the end, you get a third state where your body starts functioning correctly, and it actually feels good. And then when you finish, it's just exhilarating, like the runner's high, like how they say. And also I would say, like, probably there is also another phase that's just for the rest of the day. You feel like whatever you're doing, it's easier because you already had such a big challenge where you're just performing at your best. Like whatever you're doing afterwards is just, oh, this is kind of easier. So how is it for you? How was your experience? And I never got to the hallucination part, so I'd like to hear about that one.
Yeah, so I think absolutely. I think the harder things you voluntarily force yourself to do, the easier the day-to-day stresses of life become. So if you're pushing yourself to do horrendously hard things, and could be big running projects, it could be anything. There's loads of people who do incredible things with ice baths and things like that, But once you're dealing with that discipline of your own mind, the day-to-day stresses that you used to find really hard in life, I think, become a lot easier. I think there's that aspect. And absolutely, you go through different stages. When you're out running, there's one of the biggest learnings for me was that you can feel awful, so bad, and think, there's no way I can continue to the end of what I'm trying to do feeling this way. And if I continue running and I feel horrendous, surely that's only going to get worse. And this weird thing happens that you can feel significantly better. You can feel fantastic half an hour later, and you're still running. And that for me it just was such a, I think you actually have to go through it for it to register in your brain and learn it. The first 50K I completed successfully. It was actually a loop that was a marathon length, and then the last roughly 10 kilometers was part of the same course. And I remember going, the first time I went through one of the places, I was feeling so bad, and then an hour or so later I went through the same place again and I felt amazing. And that stayed in my mind as a real learning curve, that you just have to push through those times when you're not feeling good to get to those moments where you feel euphoric. On the hallucination front, there are obviously these come about as a combination of fatigue, like physical fatigue and mental fatigue, especially on the longer ones where you're not getting much sleep, right? So especially if you've gone through a night, if you're going into your second night, that's definitely a red zone in terms of what things are going to happen. I usually get into people classify these in running as, I say people, there's actually a great runner called Galen Reynolds who has done some massive runs, big wins in the mountains, and they have classified these into 4 stages of hallucination. Stage 1 is essentially mirages. You see things that aren't there, but you kind of want to see. So maybe you're seeing other runners, maybe you're seeing course markings, all of those sorts of things. The second one is things that don't exist in reality. So you're seeing cartoons, the world's going a bit funky. The third stage is remembering scenarios that didn't happen. So you think you were running with someone, or you think your crew, or this happened or that happened, and it didn't actually happen. And then the fourth stage is a complete loss of touch with reality. So you have no idea where you are anymore. You have no idea why you're running. You don't know what the race is. You don't know anything like that. And obviously at that point, there's some fantastic stories from different races of people doing weird things, but you're probably not coherent enough to finish a race because you don't know why you're there, right?
Oh, so you might stop or...
there's, you might spend 7 hours in the woods thinking you're a dustbin collection person and going up and down people's drives collecting. You might have a complete loss of touch that like normal society exists, and you're starting to build a shelter in the woods. Like there's kind of no limit to that. But the stage 1 is kind of more obvious. The stage 2 gets really interesting, and that stage I've experienced quite a bit, where you're running and you think the ground you're running on is, you're running along a road of roast chicken legs, or there's cartoons, or there's a crab in the road trying to get you to solve a riddle so you can pass. There's
sounds fun.
Yeah. I think the worst state I was in, I finally got the 100-mile dream done, and I was feeling really great towards the end of this race. And to be honest, at this point, I had slept in a barn for 45 minutes, and we're now 37, 38 hours into a race. I'm close to the finish. There's no one left to kind of pass. I'm in the position I'm going to be in as long as I can hold it. And this deep fog came in, and I was running on this ridge. I was eating snow to try and keep myself awake and alert. And alert's a strong word. But this was a race where you could have, tracking or the course on your watch. And so my watch was saying, turn left in 900 meters. And I think, okay, head down, focus on just, moving forward. We're running. Okay, in 10 minutes of very slow running. I don't want to miss it. I'll look at my watch, just double check that, and I'd spend 10 minutes running and look at my watch, and I'd moved, 10 meters. And I had, this concept that the weird time dilation, that people were playing tricks on me, that you get into this very like paranoid state. And I couldn't focus on anything, my eyes couldn't focus on anything because of this fog. The fatigue was really settling in. And I had these 2 warring parts in my head. There was this main part of my head that was like, if we just squatted on the side of the road and pretended to be a shrub, we'd have something to focus on. So that's that seems like the most logical thing to do. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of my head vaguely remembered that previous me had decided we were aiming for this destination. Mm-hmm. Couldn't remember why, but we should continue doing that. And these were kind of warring back and forth. And then when I finished that race, a big part of me felt like this fear that what if I had imagined I had finished the race and I was actually pretending to be a shrub on the ridgeline. And to be honest, to this day, there's still a big question of whether everything in my life is imagined and I'm actually a shrub on a ridgeline. So,
wow.
And it gets interesting because that was just under 40 hours and I slept 45 minutes. When I did the single double Everest, it was slower than I'd have liked. It took 26 hours and I was seeing things that weren't there. And so this idea of now this double Everest in winter, lots of, the majority of the time is going to be spent in darkness. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a battle of my mind.
Yeah, because like when you talk about it, it sounds like most of it is just a mind, because it sounds like your body is just following, like the main struggle, the main battle is happening in your mind. Like especially when you get into the hallucination part where you lose control over what's real, what's not real.
I think so. And obviously a big battle at that stage is there's a battle to keep going. It's very easy to stop. But then there's also a battle to keep the pace up, because maybe you can convince yourself that you're gonna finish no matter what. But then within that, there's also it's hard to keep up a motivation to, why does it matter if I move faster? So that for sure is a motivation, especially on a project where there's no one else running, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you're in a race and you're trying to overtake someone or you don't want to be overtaken. So that becomes really interesting. And I think that, to be honest, the biggest motivation is, the quicker you finish it, the quicker you can stop, right? So this is, could take 2 days, could take 2.5. In my head, there's a kind of hard cutoff at 60 hours. But part of that is my motivation for the future, which is a race which has a 60-hour time limit. So just getting into the headspace of that is pretty key as well.
Wow, that sounds like a lot. When you decide to sleep, you're checking your watch, and after one Everest, you get to sleep how many hours you want, or you decide how much you want to?
So you're allowed to sleep 2 hours.
Also just like another question, like, how do you go about it? Do you have a sleeping bag and you just, whatever you just stop, sleep, and wake up and continue?
Yes, so the only race I have slept on so far, you had to carry your gear with you. So it was done in winter. It's called the Spine Race. I did the shorter half. You have to carry sleeping bag, bivy bag. You have to be able to essentially sleep or sort that out. I slept in a hay barn, climbed on top of some hay bales in some farmer's barn.
Sounds cozy.
It was, oh my God, it was cozy. And it was dry and it was warm. And to be honest, that was one of the things, is that I was running past these barns and I'd heard that people in this race do that. Mm-hmm. And it was such a temptation. I mean, I probably, like, if I did it again, I didn't really need to sleep. I was, obviously, it's like an attraction and a temptation, but I felt amazing after that, to be honest. So maybe I was faster by stopping for a bit. Then one of my great friends, Meg, who has crewed me on a lot of these things, and I've crewed her on a lot of her big projects. She crewed me for the 100K in the mountains I mentioned. And I think there were 3 points she was allowed to see me. And at the last point, we were probably 80% into the race. I majorly struggled eating on that race, so I was really out of it. Kind of hadn't been able to eat since about 40% into it. And we had the biggest section before the end of the race going into the mountains. It was getting dark, or back up into the high mountains. And I was just trying to get into a better state to be able to deal with that. And I was like, please just make me a hot water bottle, and I want to climb into my sleeping bag for a moment. And obviously she takes the piss out of me for that. But yeah, how do you sleep? It really depends on the situation, you know. Usually there's someone who's supporting you who has a car or a van or something like that where you can lie flat and get some rest. Depends where you do it. I mean, this is one of the big questions around the Everesting approach is you can do it in the middle of the mountains with the perfect hill, but then it's a lot harder to get resources and people to you. Or you can do it in a quaint little Devon village and you have much more access to things you might want. So there's a balance there. So usually in a sleeping bag in a vehicle, but then again, there's some good training to be done that people who need to sleep because they're really at their limit, they're falling asleep on their feet, will purposely sleep in the worst situation possible so that they wake up. So they'll find the most exposed part of the trail, wet, cold, windy, so that they'll try and get, 10, 15 minutes sleep. But
I was going to say the barn sounds too cozy.
Well,
if it was me, I would just be like, I keep sleeping.
I mean, anyone who knows me knows I struggle to wake up. I don't struggle to fall asleep. So that situation, what happened? So I think I was so panicked about properly falling asleep, not waking up. You had to let the safety team know that you'd stopped on purpose, to drop them a message. And then I think I text my younger sister, who is always incredible at this, to say, like, can you ring me nonstop in, X amount of time if you haven't heard from me? I don't know what I aimed for. Maybe I was aiming for 45 minutes, but I slept 3 15-minute sections. Because there is an aspect that you think, if you've pushed yourself to that level, the minute you close your eyes, you're sleeping for 20 hours straight and never waking up. The reality is that it's the same with eating. Your body's been through so much abuse that actually you can't just sleep normally for quite some time. So I think, it's not high quality sleep, right? It's emergency sleep for your body and your mind, but it's not, I think it's unlikely. I don't know. We'll see. There's probably going to be some point in the future where I accidentally fall asleep and never wake up.
Yeah, but it's so interesting that the Everesting concept, it's so easy, but like behind it is so much strategy. Like you said, like which hill do you choose? Do you want more support? Do you want a better hill? The community around you, like who's helping you? Yeah, there is so much going on, but it's so simple.
Yeah, this hill, in some ways it's perfect. In some ways it's absolutely the wrong hill. I love it. And
what is the hill again?
The hill's in Devon, just on the edge of South Dartmoor. And basically, I just love this hill. I feel so at home. You wander up there when you're not running, just in nice weather in the summer with a coffee, and you just sit and you can see across the valley, you can see Dartmoor. It's a stunning location. But the hill itself, it has a section at the bottom which is super steep, not much point trying to run it. It's a power hike. And then it goes into a very rocky, loose rock kind of path, which is either a hike or a bit of running. And then it levels out, still on this rocky path. And that's where you start running. And then it goes onto a tarmac road towards the top. And that's still running. And then it comes to this steep switchback, which is a hike through there. And then it flattens out, and then it's a run. And so it's nice that it breaks it up so that you've got these little targets where you're like, okay, I can hike this bit and I'm forcing some food down, which keeps it, because obviously the key with this is eating enough. But it breaks it up really nicely that it's a power hike, force some food in. Now I've got to force myself to run. I see where I need to run to, and then I stop. And it breaks it up really nicely like that. And then obviously you run down the hill. But yeah.
Yeah, again, it's very strategic. And we talked about sleeping, and now you mentioned eating.
Yeah.
Eating, I thought it would be like sleeping. You get after one Everesting, you stop and you eat. But it sounds like you have to eat throughout the thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're burning so much calorie. Basically,
And what do you eat?
yeah, the big discovery for anyone who has tried to run probably further than 50 kilometers is that you eating is one of the biggest struggles, because your stomach kind of either shuts down, or it's suddenly you have this kind of taste fatigue. You're not excited about any food, all of that kind of thing, and you have to force so much food down. And yeah, so you can push yourself when your muscles are tired. You can push yourself past that to keep going, but it's very hard to keep yourself moving. Essentially, if you don't have energy to burn, there's a limit to how fast you can move. That's kind of my feeling and discovery. So you can move very slowly, but if you want to be moving at any kind of reasonable pace, you need to be forcing a load of food in. Different foods work for different people. On the shorter stuff, a lot of people opt for sugar-based gels, which are great and kind of designed if you're doing a lot of anaerobic exercise. So that's like you're really pushing yourself really hard. But in most of the longer stuff, you're moving much slower and it's much longer. And to be honest, you have to mix up with different foods. You have to figure out what works for you. What can you force down when you're this fatigued? You need to have different options, because what works for you on one run, you might think makes you want to throw up on this run, right? So you need to have some sweet stuff, some savory stuff, some salty stuff, something with texture, some crunchy stuff, really to break it all up. The things that work for me are peanut butter works really well, but it's just finding the right form. And so like sugary peanut butter cups, I'll be eating a lot of those, easy to get in. Again, chocolate bars work really well for me. So it's just finding it's quite easy to couple of bites, get chocolate bar down. Crisps, especially like salt and vinegar crisps, so good texture change. Chips, if you're in a place where you can get hot chips, that's a game changer. Hot liquids are big for me, especially in the winter stuff. So like a coffee is always nice, but like a miso soup or a ginger tea or something like that, a chai tea. And yeah, so I eat a ton of sugar-based chocolate, goes down really well for me. I'm not a sweets person, but the chocolate does go down really well. And just having different forms of that so you can mix it up.
So do you stop and eat, or you try to keep running?
There's a mixture. So the majority you want to be moving whilst eating, but then there's some food that you need to stop to eat, right? So if I'm doing really badly, I still usually can get down a bowl of cereal. So the chocolate mini Weetabixes are a favorite for me. They're not something I'd eat in my normal life. Wouldn't be able to justify that, but being able to do it and get down a bowl of that kind of, again, it's pretty much sugar-based, but it's in a different form. And then there's liquids, being able to, the water I'll be consuming has electrolytes in, has salts in, but it also has a baseline of calories in there as well. So there's a little bit of sugar in there too. Chocolate milk, liquid meals work quite well as well. So like, whether that's a bowl, power shake or something like that.
In terms of water?
So consuming a lot of water constantly. Just so I'll have a bottle in my pack, constantly drinking.
The pipe, or like?
Actually, I don't get on so well with the bladders. What I have is these like soft bottles that they sit in your running pack and they kind of form to your body, and those work really well. And so yeah, consuming a lot of liquid, which also has kind of this baseline of calories. I always like a burger, usually like a non-meat burger, but burgers go down really well. So again, it really depends what situation you're in. If you're in a race, you are usually reliant on what you can carry with you. And so that's high calorie mixtures of, crisp, chocolate, bars, snacks, all that kind of stuff. Smartie or a bougier version of Smarties, I remember on that race I mentioned, I woke up in that barn and felt so bad, thinking that someone was going to have to like helicopter me out of there. And I chugged this, share bag of Smarties equivalent, and the sugar hit obviously just got me going again. So yeah, lots of that type of stuff. Yeah, a mixture. And I think there's some weird cravings that appear. And so like people being able to bring interesting stuff. But another huge favorite is there's an amazing pastry and craft ice cream place in Devon. And I'm not a huge ice cream person, but the pastries are phenomenal. So being able to get like a miso caramel cruffin or some very fancy pastry that someone can it's those little moments of joy that really...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that it sounds like having something comforting in such a hard challenge.
Yeah.
Kind of like helps you a little bit.
I mean, imagine you've been running for so many hours. You're on your first night, your second night, and then a friend's coming out to join you at like 5 a.m. and you're hallucinating. You're like, is that someone? Is that normal? Like, oh wait, do I know that person? And you're so out of it, but they've arrived to join you, and also they've brought some like hot ginger tea, or they've brought and it's just
like you see God.
Honestly, like I have some great friends.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Talking about friends and other stuff about everything, like last time you were talking about some pages from a book.
Yeah. So this I feel needs some. So my big goal is there's a race. There's always a race.
Yes.
There's a race in Tennessee called the Barkley Marathons. Barkley Marathons.
Okay.
And it is, for me, the greatest race on the planet. In 37 years, only 17 people have finished it. And trying to understand why it's so hard is complex. It's hard just to get to the start line, but that's another conversation, perhaps. But basically, the way this race functions is there's no tracking. You do 5 loops. Each loop is, on paper, it's 20 miles, but perhaps it's close to 30 miles each loop. You're probably getting lost. And to prove you've been to certain locations, there are hidden books. So you have to find the book whilst you're delirious, trying to remember in the woods where you are. And you have to tear out a page from the book that corresponds to your race number. And each loop, you're given a different race number, obviously. So then you have to tear out a different page. And the format of the race is changed. It's basically kept to make it right at the edge of human possibility. And there's a 60-hour time limit. There's a load of interesting components to it. But basically for this project, we decided that essentially how the Everesting works is you have to validate that you've done it correctly. The hill has to be a segment on Strava. It has to be like a named segment on Strava for people who know how that works. And you have to do complete segments. So if 50 hill reps would get you 1 meter short of Everest, you have to do a whole nother hill rep.
Ooh.
And so because your GPS device might be slightly inaccurate, so it's going off the actual contours of the hill. So I knew I couldn't just rely on my watch to tell me when I'd done the full Everest. My friends, who are fully aware that I am very keen on this race, they thought this great idea, let's take a book, and every time I go up the hill, I take a page out the book and deposit it at the top of the hill, so I'd know how many times I'd gone up the hill and I wouldn't forget.
That's beautiful because it's so symbolic. It's not just a watch.
It's symbolic and also made me feel like someone was playing a sick game on me. I'm Sisyphus, like just constantly taking one page up at a time. But it's a great concept that works. I think one of the big questions is when you get to the point that potentially, as I'm going through night 2, I'll be in a state where I'll suddenly be like, wait a second, did I grab a page at the bottom? Did I forget a page? am I going up the hill? Am I going down the hill? I can't remember anymore. And that's where, like, obviously it starts to fall apart, but hopefully I have some good friends there to figure out what I'm doing and keep me going straight.
So how many pages would that be? And is it any particular book?
So it's 114 times up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
The obvious thing is that most pages have 2 numbers on them because they're two-sided pages. Mm-hmm. So it might count up and down as 2, makes it a lot easier with the pages, and take 228 pages up, or 228 numbers, 114 pages. The book, we've been having a vote on the kind of group chat. The Barclay Marathons is great at picking books that are, when you've been running in the woods and not sleeping, and I say woods, it's one of the harshest conditions where this race is set. You are hallucinating a bit, you're scared, you're paranoid, and then you're picking a book and the book says, you're going to die out here, or it's called something like that, And so having these titles that are just really fun, like funny, but kind of jabbing at you. There's a great instance of this race in 2017 where someone missed the cutoff of the race by 6 seconds. Now, I think this is the hardest race on planet Earth. People dedicate years and years and years and years to try and figure this race out. And this person manages it. They put their heart and soul into this, and they arrive 6 seconds too late.
Oh, that's
so
horrible.
They're not an official finisher. And the next year, when they were out on the course, one of the books was called 6 Seconds. Imagine the taunting aspect of that.
Oh my God.
So the books that have been suggested.
Who are the organizers?
The books that have been suggested are, we've got Paradise Lost, Dante's Inferno.
Interesting.
What have we got? The Places I've Cried in Public. The Trial. What else have we got? We've got Snail on the Slope. So we're just kind of narrowing down to figure out The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul. Just funny, interesting books. So we'll see which one we pick. But
okay, cool. I'm curious to hear which one. To anyone listening to this, they would be like, what does he do in his normal life? Because after you do something so intense, you take up these challenges in your everyday life. How do you keep yourself occupied?
Yeah, great question. So I work on the brand side for a startup in the marketing industry. Historically, I've always been in the food industry, like marketing in the food industry. And I got lured away because this is such an interesting company. The company they're called Wipe, W-Y-P-E, and they make a gel you put on toilet paper to upgrade toilet paper to be like a wet wipe or like a bidet-esque experience. For those familiar with using a bidet in France or Italy, it's an interesting concept where people in the UK, US are really used to using dry toilet paper. Some people, for hygiene reasons, start using wet wipes. That's a huge eco nightmare. But it's a really fascinating one. A lot of countries use water or a toilet with jets. A lot of countries use a bidet or something similar. And
Japan uses robots.
Whatever you can get. But basically it's easy to kind of have on you, little bottle gel, doesn't kind of disintegrate the toilet paper, upgrades the experience. And it's so rare that you get the opportunity to kind of work on not just a new product in a category with a new angle, but a new category. So we have been growing really well, got huge plans, small team, so lots of interesting stuff. I think probably my mindset works pretty well for startups because there's lots of big challenges. It evolves fast,
Mm-hmm.
If you want to make something happen, you kind of have to will it into reality. So that's what I do when I am not out running. But that's the other part of my life at the moment.
Sounds very similar to taking up a challenge, running challenges. Like you're trying to expand the frontier, but business-wise or like product or service-wise, there is this product or service that does not exist, but it could be useful to society. So let's try to will it into
Yeah,
regardless of,
exactly.
like
And,
said.
you know, like has huge well-being benefits for loads of people who use it. And we have a great customer base, you know, over 100,000 customers. And, you know, the application of Vast, I feel like it's a product that once people use it, they're like, why have I not used this my entire life? It's like a much nicer experience. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's fun. Lots, as you can imagine, lots of humor involved as well.
Yeah, as someone that I was born in Italy and lived my whole life in Italy, and like you said, in Italy every house has a bidet.
Yeah.
So moving here and just finding out that it's not like the norm.
Yeah.
I think that department needs some improvement. So.
So, exactly, yeah. Right.
Thanks for, for looking into it.
One of the co-founders is Italian, and this is kind of how this started with the discovery that, you know, it's if you're used to bidet, you miss the bidet, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the other part, and obviously when you're trying to work a normal career or a job that has some intensity to it as well, it's interesting trying to figure out how you get in the level of hours of running or training you need to do. I think like most people going into any of these projects, they feel like they could have done a better job getting in more training, but we are where we are. You know, you have to exist within the world you do and kind of figure it out and get creative about how you fit in runs and cycles and all of that. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, is there anything that you would like to add, or question that I didn't ask that you would like to talk about?
I think that's it. It's the kind of calm before the storm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun to have this conversation like kind of 20 hours before.
Yeah. Just like to register what my mental state is now and how broken I will be afterwards. Yeah. Obviously it's a huge unknown. It's longer than I've ever gone.
Yeah.
It's a whole Everest further in elevation. So yeah, there's some big unknowns, and obviously the big one is going to be the amount of time that it's going to take is much longer than I've been out. So we'll see.
Nice. Sounds very exciting. I'm really amazed that someone like you decides to pick up something so hard, but at the same time, like after talking to you, there is a rationale behind it. And yeah, good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks for chatting.
Oh, no worries. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited and afraid.
I'm excited as well, even if I'm not going to do it. But yeah, it will be interesting to hear about it afterwards.
Yeah, looking forward to another catch up.
Yes.